The cashmere throw was gone. Not missing, not misplaced, gone. In the specific, irretrievable way that things go when a baby abyssal fire dragon decides a $400 throw blanket is a nest, and his body temperature runs somewhere between the surface of the sun and the kind of industrial forge that makes axles for freight trains. It was now a sculptural installation of charcoal fibers and crystallized ember, arranged on the living room floor in a rough oval that Soot was currently sleeping inside, with the smug, boneless sprawl of a creature who had never once considered the concept of consequences. That was fine. That was manageable. What was not manageable on this particular Thursday morning was the fact that Fenris Blackfang, 3-century-old assassin and the single most aggravating non-fire-breathing entity in Lucas Gray's life, was standing in Lucas's kitchen, eating Lucas's grass-fed beef jerky directly from the bag, wearing nothing but a pair of Lucas's spare sweatpants, with Sera's head resting on his shoulder as she pointed something out on her phone and laughed. Lucas stood in the hallway and watched the scene for exactly 4 seconds before his wolf went completely berserk. "That is our shoulder," it snarled. "Our mate is using someone else's shoulder as a resting surface. This is a territorial violation of the highest order." The ancient laws of the pack are clear on this subject. The ancient laws of the pack are very, very clear. Fenris looked up, caught Lucas's eye, chewed a strip of jerky with theatrical slowness, and raised one eyebrow. Lucas walked to the kitchen, set his tablet down on the marble counter with a precision that communicated his exact emotional state, poured himself an espresso, and said, in the voice of a man who is technically being civilized, "Fenris, there's a chair right there." "The chair is farther from the jerky," Fenris said. "The shoulder," Lucas said, "is taken." Sera looked up from her phone. Her gray eyes were bright with the particular amused clarity of a woman who had mapped the exact boundaries of her husband's patience and was currently standing 6 inches past them for sport. "I was showing him the permit forms for the shelter's new outdoor run. He's better at reading municipal code than you'd think. It's the 300-year lifespan. He's absorbed a lot of bureaucratic language by proximity." "He absorbed it from our shoulder," Lucas said. "Your shoulder," Sera corrected sweetly. "His shoulder was doing nothing useful." Fenris reached into the jerky bag again. The sound of the crinkle was, to Lucas's extremely refined supernatural hearing, the aural equivalent of being poked in the ribs. "This is very good jerky," the assassin remarked, to no one in particular. "It is $14 a bag," Lucas said. "17," Fenris corrected. She switched to the premium reserve after she decided the regular blend was giving Soot existential distress. Lucas looked at Sera. Sera looked, with great interest, at the ceiling. On the living room floor, Soot shifted in his sleep, made a small noise like a garbage disposal encountering a marble, and sneezed. A comet of black sparks erupted from his nostrils, arced gracefully across the 6 feet of space between the burn oval and Lucas's favorite reading chair, and left 3 star-shaped scorch marks on the armrest that exactly matched the ones already on the ottoman, the secondary bookcase, and the south-facing wall beside the kitchen entrance. Lucas pressed 2 fingers to his temple. He breathed in. He breathed out. He was going to need more espresso. And also, he thought, with the cool, architectural precision of a man who had once built an entire corporate empire out of sheer organizational willpower. A plan. The plan began at 9:17 that morning, in Lucas's home office, behind a closed door that had been checked 3 times for gaps at the bottom before he sat down and opened the document. He called it the Penthouse Cohabitation Standards Addendum. It was, by any objective measure, a masterwork of controlled environment policy writing. 112 pages of carefully structured expectations, behavioral parameters, mutual obligations, and the kind of consequence framework that only a man with a law degree, an MBA, and the anxiety profile of a migratory falcon could produce in 4 hours. It had an index. It had footnotes. It had an appendix covering fire safety protocols that ran to 17 pages by itself and referenced 3 separate international fire codes and 1 ancient supernatural charter regarding the cohabitation of elemental creatures and human-adjacent structures. Lucas printed it. He used the good paper. He walked to the kitchen. Fenris was now sitting on the white sofa, reading the shelter's municipal permits, with the focused, slightly contemptuous expression he brought to all text-based tasks, as if the documents had personally insulted him, but he was going to defeat them out of spite. Soot was draped across his feet like the world's most dangerous foot warmer, his molten copper eyes half open, pupils contracted to thin vertical lines in the morning light. They had reached, in the week since Soot's arrival, a territorial détente that Lucas could only describe as two entities who found each other mutually insufferable but shared a common interest in proximity to Sera. Lucas placed the addendum on the coffee table in front of Fenris, with the measured deliberateness of a man serving legal papers in a country where the justice system was made of gunpowder. Fenris looked at it. Then he looked at Lucas. "That is a lot of pages," he said. 112. The executive summary is on page 4. There is also a glossary beginning on page 97. Lucas sat across from him, crossed one leg over the other, and folded his hands with the composed stillness of a man who had run 7 hostile takeovers before his 40th birthday. "I'd like to walk through the highlights." "I'm busy," Fenris said, returning to the permits. "You're reading a document about drainage easements. It's a very interesting drainage easement." "Fenris." The assassin set down the permits, reached into his emergency jerky supply, which lived behind the sofa cushion, and which Lucas was going to address in section 4.3, and bit off a strip with the calm deliberateness of a man who understood exactly how aggravating he was and had made peace with that understanding roughly 280 years ago. "Talk," he said. Lucas turned the addendum to the flag tab on page 12, Article 3, Clause 1. He read, precisely, without drama. "In all common areas of the shared residence, occupant B, that's you, shall remain in his human-presenting form during standard waking hours unless a documented supernatural emergency requires otherwise. Emergency classification is defined in Appendix B, subsection." "No." Lucas looked up from the document. "No," Fenris said again, with the simple, absolute economy of a man who had once ended entire bloodlines with less syllables. "The wolf form sheds," Lucas said. "Everything sheds. It sheds differentially. The fiber-by-fiber analysis I commissioned last week confirmed that Husky form shedding requires a 14% increase in HEPA filtration capacity, creates an average of 0.73 kilograms of loose fiber per week, and has thus far been directly responsible for, you commissioned a fiber analysis. It took 11 hours. Lucas." Fenris said his name the way geologists say the word erosion. Not threatening, simply the acknowledgement of a long, slow process that couldn't be stopped. "I stayed in Husky form for 3 weeks because I needed cover. I am not going to resume a disguise in a penthouse I live in front of people who already know what I am, because you have complicated feelings about dander." He reached for another piece of jerky. "Get to the part you actually care about." Lucas's jaw worked. Fenris's mismatched eyes, the ice blue left, the deep amber right, settled on Lucas's face with an expression that had navigated the interior lives of men far better at concealing themselves than an alpha werewolf who organized his books by color gradient. "The physical contact clause," Fenris said. "That is why you made a 112-page document. You want a rule about whether I can touch your mate." "Article 7, Lucas said. "Physical proximity guidelines." "Which you drafted," Fenris said. "Because this morning I was standing approximately 1 foot away from Sera while she laughed at a municipal permit, and your wolf spent 4 seconds screaming loud enough that I could feel it through the floorboards. That is a significant overstatement of..." "I am 300 years old," Fenris said. "I have never in those 300 years harbored a personal interest in your wife. I will never in the remaining centuries of my life harbor one. This is because she is, objectively, the most relentlessly optimistic, catastrophically kind human being I have ever encountered in the entire span of recorded supernatural history. And she thinks I am a person who deserves warmth and employment and premium jerky, and those 3 facts are collectively so disorienting that the only emotion I am capable of experiencing in her direction is something that I am going to call gratitude, because I do not have better vocabulary for it, and it is the least romantic thing that has ever happened to me." He paused. "Also, she sings Celine Dion when she's nervous. I am not equipped for that. No one is equipped for that." Lucas stared at him for a long moment. "The jerky clause still stands," he said. "The jerky clause is insane." Section 4.3. Consumption of foodstuffs allocated to supernatural house guests shall occur at the designated kitchen counter or dining table and not be cached in upholstered furniture. Fenris reached behind the sofa cushion and produced the secret jerky bag. He set it on the coffee table with gentle, deliberate ceremony. He looked at Lucas. He reached into it and extracted a strip, maintaining eye contact throughout. The sound that came from behind Lucas's sternum was not entirely human. "I only care about the jerky," Fenris said. Not unkindly. "I am not interested in your domestic insecurities, Gray. I am interested in the jerky, and in not being hunted by European guilds, and slightly in the small hellfire monster currently trying to incinerate my left foot." He looked down at Soot, who had awakened and was nosing at his ankle with the intensity of an entity who had decided, unilaterally, that Fenris was a suitable heating element and that proximity to him was therefore worth tolerating. "Get rid of the clauses about Sera. Keep the fire safety appendix. The 17 pages are probably insufficient, but it is a start." Lucas looked at the addendum. He thought, very briefly, about arguing further. He thought about the fact that he had spent 4 hours producing a document that was now being used as a coaster for an artisan jerky bag, and that the man who had done that was technically right about every single thing he had said, including the parts that Lucas most wanted to be wrong about. He closed the binder. He stood up. "The jerky comes out of your salary," he said. "I don't have a salary. Sera is working on it." Fenris made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a growl, a kind of ancient, bone-deep exhalation, the noise 3 centuries of adaptation makes when it encounters a new organizational chart and decides, reluctantly, to comply. "Fine," he said. He put the secret jerky bag back behind the sofa cushion. Then, at a precise angle calculated to be maximally visible from Lucas's current line of sight, he produced a second bag from behind the other cushion. Lucas walked back to his office and shut the door. The sound of deliberate, savoring chewing followed him down the hall. That night, at 2:47 in the morning, Lucas was pulled out of a dead sleep by a sound. It took him half a second to classify it, less time than that for his wolf to snap from rest to full alert, because the sound was small, very small, almost below hearing, but it was wrong. It had the frequency of distress. Specifically, infant distress, the particular pitch of a creature that had no language for what it was experiencing, and was, as a result, broadcasting the raw signal directly into the world. Sera was already sitting up. She moved before Lucas did, and that was the thing about his wife that still, 14 months into their marriage, made his chest do something architecturally unsound. She was not a supernatural creature. She did not have enhanced hearing, or predatory instincts, or 3 centuries of crisis management behind her. She was a human woman who had spent 12 years in a profession that required you to recognize, in the dark and in the silence, the specific frequencies of creatures who needed help and couldn't tell you why. She was out of bed, padding down the hall in bare feet, and Lucas's old light blue dress shirt, the one that came to mid-thigh and had a collar that slipped off her shoulder before Lucas had processed the sound a second time. He followed her. They had put Soot in the guest bathroom at night, in a fireproof ceramic habitat that Lucas had sourced from a supernatural specialty supplier at considerable expense, lined with heat-resistant substrate, and equipped with a ventilation system designed to capture and neutralize sulfurous emissions at a rate of 4 cubic feet per minute. It was, functionally, a very expensive terrarium. Sera had put a small stuffed rabbit inside it because she believed in comfort objects and refused to be persuaded otherwise by anyone, including Lucas, Fenris, or the 3 separate supernatural archivists who had all, independently, suggested that abyssal fire dragons were not typically responsive to soft toy sensory input. Soot had immediately incinerated the stuffed rabbit. But the gesture, Sera insisted, was what counted. Now, in the blue dark of the guest bathroom, Soot was pressed into the corner of his habitat, his charcoal black body curled tight, his barbed tail wrapped around himself like a coil of defensive posture, his eyes the molten copper, the slit pupils wide and glowing at full intensity in the dark. And he was making the sound. A small, low, rattling keen, like a diesel engine heard through 6 floors of concrete, like something that could be enormous if it were older and wasn't, right now, the size of a grapefruit, and scared. His sneezes were coming rapid fire. Black sparks, uncontrolled, arcing in random directions, hitting the ceramic walls, and leaving scorch blossoms. Not the star shapes he left when he was being deliberate. Ragged shapes. The shapes distress makes when it doesn't have time to be organized. Sera opened the habitat. Lucas reached out on reflex. Not to stop her, he knew better than that. Had learned that specific lesson 3 times in 14 months with escalating emphasis, but with the instinct of a man who could see every possible injury vector and wanted, in the way the wolf had always wanted, to put himself between her and anything that could hurt her. Sera gave his hand a brief, warm squeeze and stepped forward anyway. "Hey," she said, and her voice was the one she used with the animals at the shelter, stripped of all performance and wit and the bright, forward-pointing energy that characterized Sera Collins Gray in full operational mode. This was what lived underneath all of that. Something very quiet and very sure. "Hey, little monster. I hear you." Soot's eyes snapped to her face. A spark caught the edge of her sleeve. She didn't flinch. She reached in, slow and steady, and picked him up with both hands, cradling him against her chest with the secure, practiced grip of someone who had held 1,000 animals through 1,000 bad nights. He was hot. Lucas, standing in the doorway, could feel the radiant heat from 6 feet away. The kind of temperature that should have been causing burns, that was absolutely causing burns in any standard physics-based framework. But Sera had, at some point in the month since Soot's arrival, stopped showing any visible sign of discomfort from it. Her skin didn't redden. The light blue shirt, which should have been smoldering, didn't so much as warm. The wolf had opinions about this that Lucas was saving for a different conversation. She sat down on the bathroom floor, cross-legged, and held Soot against her sternum. And she spoke to him in that low, steady voice. Not baby talk, not the cooing endearments she deployed in daylight when she was feeling playful and dramatic, and Soot was being obstinate in the entertaining way versus the alarming way. Just words, quiet even, specific words. "You're safe," she said. "Right here. Nothing's getting you. You're safe." Soot sneezed again. Sparks. They caught the hem of her sleeve and went out immediately, as if the fabric had decided independently not to cooperate with the combustion. Lucas quietly retrieved the fireproof blanket from the shelf above the habitat. He had installed that shelf specifically for this purpose, along with the fire suppression ventilation and 4 compact dry chemical extinguishers distributed around the bathroom at ergonomically accessible heights, and carried it to Sera. He crouched beside her and wrapped it around both of them, Sera and the dragon, tucking the edges in with the careful, precise movements of a man whose hands knew how to be gentle when gentleness was required. Sera tilted her head back and looked up at him, and in the glow of Soot's eyes, her gray ones were soft in a way they only ever were in private, in these hours when the performance was off, and what remained was just the 2 of them, and whatever this was that they'd built together. "He gets them sometimes," she said. "The night terrors. I don't know what it is exactly, but I think he was somewhere bad before the shelter found him. Something scared him. Something before." Lucas said nothing. His wolf, which had been at maximum alert since the sound that had woken him, was doing something odd. It was settling. The presence of his mate on the bathroom floor, wrapped in a fireproof blanket with a hellfire infant pressed against her chest, was not the threat scenario it had mobilized for. It was something else, something the wolf recognized with a certainty that predated language. The care of a creature for one smaller and frightened and entirely undefended. Lucas had spent his childhood being that smaller creature. He knew what it looked like when someone decided, against all rational self-interest, to sit on a cold floor and be the anchor. Soot made a small sound. The rapid sparks slowed, then stopped. The molten copper glow of his eyes dimmed from alarm flare to the low, constant ember that was his baseline in contentment, the slow burn equivalent of a normal creature's relaxed expression. He pressed his face into the curve of Sera's neck, and the rattling keen became, gradually, the diesel engine purr. "There you go," Sera murmured. "There you are." Lucas put his hand on her back. She leaned into it. From down the hall came the sound of Fenris's door opening. The assassin had, apparently, also heard the distress signals, followed by a long pause, followed by the sound of the door closing again, which Lucas interpreted as Fenris arriving at the doorway, observing the scene, calculating that his presence was neither required nor requested, and retreating with an efficiency and discretion that was the closest thing to courtesy a 3-century-old rove werewolf was structurally capable of producing. Lucas was going to note that in the addendum under the heading of positive behavioral indicators. He was going to delete the entire addendum tomorrow and never speak of it again. But he was going to note it first. "We're the same," Sera said quietly to the dragon sleeping on her chest. "You and me. Somebody put us somewhere bad, and then somebody found us, and now we're here." She looked at the bathroom wall, and her voice had dropped to the register that meant she was saying something she'd thought many times but rarely said out loud. "Nobody gets evicted from this family. I just want you to know that. Nobody." Lucas pressed his lips to her hair. He did not speak. His wolf made the low, resonant hum that lived below sound, below language, below thought, the one that said mine and safe and never again. Soot purred like a diesel engine warming up for a long haul. Nobody told any of them they were being watched from the hallway by a 6'4" ancient assassin whose mismatched eyes were doing something complicated in the dark. Morning came with the announcement of priorities. Soot, recharged from a full night's sleep and 6 hours of proximity to Sera's presumably inexhaustible thermal tolerance, arrived in the kitchen at 7 with the energy of a creature who had decided that today was going to be operationally aggressive. He had discovered, sometime in the previous 4 days, that he could navigate the penthouse unassisted, which meant that his morning routine now involved a tour of all surfaces he had previously identified as belonging to Lucas specifically, in order to assess whether they still required scorching. He had excellent aim. He aimed at everything that Lucas had specifically indicated was important to him. On this particular morning, he zeroed in on the section of the closet that housed Lucas's tie collection. Lucas's ties were arranged by color gradient, naturally. Silk, hand-stitched, each one acquired through a process that Sera had once described as Lucas having feelings about fabric, which was objectively unfair, but not technically incorrect. The one that hung at the end of the row, the stiffest one, the one with the most structure, the charcoal and steel geometric weave that Lucas wore to board meetings when he needed to communicate the specific message that this meeting will go exactly as I have determined it will go, and all alternatives are theoretical, was, by any metric, his most important tie. Soot looked at it. His molten eyes narrowed. His barbed tail rose to the classic pre-sneeze elevated position that Lucas had by now cataloged and documented and assigned a 3-second warning parameter. "Don't," Lucas said from the doorway. Soot sneezed. The tie caught immediately. It was gone in 4 seconds, incinerated with a thoroughness that suggested Soot had put considered effort into the flame geometry. What remained was a silhouette of ash and a star-shaped scorch mark on the carpet, plus 3 additional scorch marks in the shape of small clawed footprints leading away from the scene. Soot trotted past Lucas's feet, sat down in the kitchen beside Sera's chair, and looked up at her with the unmistakable expression of a creature seeking validation. Sera looked at the tie ash. She looked at Soot. She looked at Lucas, who was gripping the doorframe with the measured force of a man trying very hard not to be unreasonable about $300 worth of silk. Aesthetically, Sera said carefully, I think he was making a point about the geometric weave. It was a very stiff tie, Lucas. It was my most important tie. It was very, very stiff. It was Sera. I'm just saying the level of structural rigidity in that tie was bordering on self-defense weaponry. I nearly impaled myself on it twice. She reached down and scratched Soot between his enormous bat-like ears. He purred. Besides, I think it looks better as modernist installation art. Very avant-garde. That is a scorch mark on my carpet, in the shape of a tiny star. She tilted her head. Actually, it's kind of cute. Lucas looked at the ceiling. He thought about the addendum. He thought about Article 11, which he had titled Targeted Destruction of Personal Property, and which had, under current household dynamics, the structural authority of a suggestion written in warm butter. He did it on purpose, Lucas said. Of course he did, Sera agreed. He's very smart. He's been doing it on purpose since Tuesday. He burned the bookmark in my first edition Austen. He scorched the leg of my reading chair in a pattern that looks, I want you to know I had it professionally analyzed, looks like the letter F. Sera made a face that was doing enormous work to suppress something. The letter F. Fenris's initials. I mean, it could also be any other F word. I have a theory, Lucas said. Sera stood up, took 2 steps across the kitchen, and put both hands on Lucas's chest, looking up at him with the gray eyes that still, absurdly, after 14 months, had the ability to reset his entire nervous system by being aimed directly at him. Your theory, she said, is that Soot has formed a strategic alliance with Fenris to undermine your territorial authority, and they are conducting a coordinated campaign via targeted property destruction. The pattern is consistent. Lucas. She pressed a kiss to the corner of his jaw. He's 4 weeks old. He's an infant. He burns things because he's distressed or because he's playing or because his internal thermostat runs hot. He burned Fenris's shoe last Thursday, and Fenris's expression was exactly the same as yours right now. This was technically true. The knowledge that Soot had incinerated one of Fenris's shoes did not make Lucas feel better, but it provided a kind of cold, bilateral comfort that he noted and set aside. The geometric tie was his best work yet, Sera added, in a tone of transparent diplomacy. I'm going to tell him it was good aim. Please do not reinforce. Excellent aim, Soot. She looked down at the dragon. Very precise. Soot's barbed tail wagged. He sneezed 3 small, celebratory sparks. Lucas walked to the espresso machine. He pressed the start button with exactly the force required to activate it, and not 1 gram more. This is not over, he said. The tie is definitely over, Sera confirmed. From the hallway, Fenris's voice arrived, dry and flat as a winter plain. There is coffee! Someone bring me coffee! Make your own coffee, Lucas called. I don't know how your machine works. It has 3 buttons. 3 buttons is 2 more than necessary. You have 17 forms of unarmed combat, and you cannot manage a 3-button espresso machine. I could manage it, Fenris said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with the unhurried confidence of a creature that had never in 300 years felt any particular pressure to be somewhere on time. I choose not to. There is a hierarchy of morning labor. I am not at the bottom of it. You are absolutely at the bottom of it, Lucas said. I am older than this building. You live here rent-free. I answer your wife's phones. You tell callers that the shelter does not guarantee the temperament of any animal, and this is morally appropriate. It is morally appropriate. I stand behind that messaging. Fenris sat down at the kitchen island, folded his hands, and looked at Lucas with the patient expression of a man who would simply continue being in the kitchen until coffee materialized, because entropy was on his side, and he had nothing but time. The coffee, he said. Soot trotted over to Fenris's foot, sniffed it, decided it was acceptable, and sat on it. Fenris looked down at the dragon. The dragon looked up at the assassin. A negotiation passed between them in the silent frequency of 2 creatures who operated by their own particular physics and had, through weeks of parallel proximity to Sera's gravitational force, arrived at a mutual tolerance that neither of them would have admitted to under oath. Fenris reached down and touched the top of Soot's head with 2 fingers. Not a scratch, not an affectionate gesture, just contact. The specific contact of a creature acknowledging that another creature exists and has earned, fractionally, the acknowledgement. Suit purred. Lucas made 3 espressos. He slid one across the counter to Fenris with the resigned efficiency of a man who has picked his battles and is strategically retreating from this one. Fenris accepted it without comment. Lucas drank his own in silence, standing at the window, watching the city arrange itself 43 floors below in the indifferent geometric patterns that had always, before Sera, been the most reliable order in his life. That evening, he went back to his office, closed the door, and spent 45 minutes planning a logistics operation. The titanium box took 3 days to procure. It was not a standard item. There were, it turned out, approximately 4 companies in the world that manufactured fire-resistant containment units rated for abyssal-grade thermal output, and only one of them could guarantee delivery to a private address in under 72 hours, and that one required payment through a shell corporation that Lucas maintained for purposes exactly like this. The box had 3-inch walls, a sealed gasket, and a ventilation system sophisticated enough to maintain atmospheric pressure equilibrium during transport. It was also large enough to comfortably contain a grapefruit-sized dragon for a 2-hour drive. Lucas moved the funds through the Shell Corporation at 9:30 on a Wednesday morning. He did it from his phone, in the elevator between his home office and the penthouse kitchen. In the 30-second window, he had calculated Sera would be on her call with the municipal licensing office about the shelter's new outdoor run. He used the subsidiary because the corporate account would have shown up on the consolidated monitoring dashboard that Sera reviewed every Friday morning as part of her administrative protocol. He had, long ago, made the mistake of underestimating her administrative protocol. He did not intend to make it again. He recruited Fenris at lunch. He did not enjoy this. "No," Fenris said, without looking up from the magazine he was reading, which was a gardening publication that he received by mail every month and which Lucas suspected he chose specifically for the incongruity. "You hate the fire damage," Lucas said. "I hate many things. I manage them." "He burned your shoe." A pause. A very small pause. "He burned the left one. I still have the right one. It's a half pair. It is insufficient and insulting, and I am not yet over it." Fenris turned a page. "Describe the plan." Lucas described the plan. It was elegant in its simplicity. The Dragon Warden Network, the international guild responsible for tracking, managing, and, when necessary, relocating high-risk supernatural creatures, maintained a secured border sanctuary approximately 2 hours from the city. The sanctuary was well-funded, professionally staffed, and equipped with exactly the kind of infrastructure that an abyssal fire dragon required. Sera would be at a charity gala, a fundraising dinner for the shelter's new veterinary wing that she had scheduled 3 weeks ago, and that would run from 7 to 11. The transfer would happen between 8 and 10. By the time Sera returned, Suit would be in legitimate, professional care, and the penthouse would be, structurally speaking, survivable. Fenris considered this. "She will find out," he said. "Not if we move quickly." "She always finds out. She found out about the fake health inspectors before the inspectors had finished parking. She found out about the pack protection ceremony before I had agreed to attend it. She found out about the second jerky bag before I had finished installing it." He paused. "She found out about your plan to have the carpet replaced without telling her. That was different." She noticed the different pile height. "In the dark. At 3 a.m. Fenris finally set down the gardening magazine. His mismatched eyes held the careful, assessing look of a man running strategic probability assessments. "Tell me one thing. If the Dragon Wardens take him, does she lose him? Can she get him back? Is there a legal mechanism?" Lucas had spent considerable time on this question. The current situation is legally ambiguous. Suit is classified as an unlicensed supernatural animal in active care, which means technically he's in regulatory limbo. If the Wardens take him through official channels, the process to recover him takes between 6 months and 2 years, depending on guild bureaucracy. "So she loses him," Fenris said. "She loses him for the duration of the process." Fenris was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She sat on the floor in the dark and held him for 2 hours and didn't flinch once when he burned her sleeve." She has the thermal tolerance of... That is not why she didn't flinch. Fenris picked up his magazine. 6:30. Underground garage. I'll drive the box. You handle the paperwork. He turned a page. And gray. When this goes wrong, and it will go wrong, remember that you had the option not to do this. It's not going to go wrong. Everything goes wrong, Fenris said, with 3 centuries of evidence in his voice. The question is only how. It went wrong at 9:28. They found her in the underground garage at exactly the moment they arrived with the titanium box. She was leaning against the passenger side of Lucas's black luxury SUV, arms crossed, red lipstick on, and fully operational, in a dress that she had apparently worn to the charity gala for the 4 hours it had run, before she had presumably discovered something that caused her to end the evening early and arrange herself in this specific location with the patient, settled energy of someone who has chosen their ground and intends to hold it. She was wearing the expression she wore when she had all the information and was deciding in real time how much of it to deploy. Lucas stopped walking. Fenris stopped walking. Suit, in the titanium box that Lucas was carrying, produced a muffled purr that was either contentment or judgment. Given the week he'd had, Lucas was not in a position to assume it was the former. The underground garage was all concrete and fluorescent light, and in that light, Sera looked like a painting of herself, vivid red lipstick, storm gray eyes, the specific kind of stillness she produced when she was the most dangerous person in a room and was in no rush to demonstrate it. She had a folder under her arm. She always had a folder. Lucas was beginning to believe that she produced folders the way Suit produced sparks, involuntarily, in response to stimuli, with a precision that appeared effortless, and was in fact the product of an extraordinary amount of underlying preparation. She looked at the titanium box. She looked at Lucas. She looked at Fenris. She looked back at the box with the calm, assessing attention she gave to new animals at the shelter, noting dimensions, weight, construction quality, structural purpose. "That's fireproof, right?" she said. 3-inch walls, Lucas said. Sealed gasket, abyssal-grade thermal rating. "Gorgeous," Sera said. "I especially love the part where you bought it through the Calder Street subsidiary, which you use for acquisitions you'd prefer I not immediately see on the consolidated dashboard, which I monitor every Friday morning, which both of you appear to have collectively forgotten." Fenris said nothing. He had the look of a man whose weather report had been validated with the full force of observed meteorological evidence. "Also," Sera said, "the charity gala ended at 9 because someone, and I'm not going to name names, but his name starts with Miles and ends in, 'Your assistant texted me to confirm whether you'd authorized an emergency supernatural transport permit, forgot to delete the permit application before CCing the confirmation to the shelter's administrative email, which is an account I check on my phone every 40 minutes because this is my shelter, and I am not a person who stops checking things.'" Lucas pulled out his phone. Miles had sent him a message 40 minutes ago that read, "There may be a small administrative issue I need to discuss with you at your earliest convenience." The next message, sent 3 minutes later, "I'm so sorry." The next message, sent 2 minutes after that, "She knows." "I'm so sorry. I've sent my resignation already." Lucas, Lucas put his phone away. He would deal with the resignation in the morning. Miles was not, under any circumstances, actually allowed to resign. "Sera," he started. "You were going to send him away," she said, and her voice was quiet now, not loud. Quiet in the way of something that has found its center and is speaking from there, where the performance and the wit and the bright, forward-pointing energy all pause, and what remains is just the architecture of who she actually was underneath all of it. "Without telling me. Without Lucas. Do you understand what that is? Do you understand what it means, the way it feels, to have someone decide for you that something you love is too dangerous, too complicated, too much work, and arrange for it to just be gone one day while you're not looking?" She uncrossed her arms. Her gray eyes were direct and steady and contained the full, unmistakable weight of 28 years, of someone who had learned to fight for everything that mattered because nothing had ever simply stayed. Not the anger version of that, not the raised voice, the sharpened wit, the spectacular takedown. The quiet version. The version that cost more. I grew up in 12 different houses, she said. 12 families who decided, for their own reasonable reasons, that I was too much, or not enough, or both at once. 12 different times something that should have been permanent turned out to have a contract with an expiration date I hadn't been told about. And the only consistency in those 28 years, the only thing that was never conditional, never temporary, never handed back at the end of a placement, was the animals. The ones nobody else would take. The ones that bit and scratched and needed more work than they were worth by anyone's accounting. She looked at the titanium box. He's 4 weeks old. He's scared at night. He burned your tie and your throw blanket and a very unfortunate section of the reading chair arm. And he is mine, Lucas. He's mine the same way Biscuit is mine, the same way Fenris is mine, the same way you are mine, and nobody. Her voice was not raised. It was simply clear, the way a bell is clear, gets evicted from my family without my permission. The garage was very quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed. A distant ventilation fan turned in its housing. The titanium box emitted a muffled diesel purr. Lucas set the box down. He straightened up. He looked at his wife, and the wolf inside him was very still. The stillness of something that had been called to account and was receiving that accounting with the attention it deserved. He had spent a lifetime building organizational systems and risk frameworks because control was the thing he understood, because order was the language he spoke fluently, because a part of him that predated logic and post-dated therapy had always, on some level, believed that if he managed enough variables, nothing he loved could be taken from him. That belief was also, structurally, the belief that he should manage this, arrange this, file the permit, procure the box, deploy the logistics. Make the decision from a position of authority without considering that the authority over this particular decision had never been his. "You're right," he said. Sera blinked. Not dramatically, just fractionally, the micro-expression of someone who had calibrated their argument for more resistance. "You're right," he said again. "I should have talked to you. I handled it the way I handle corporate problems with logistics and resources, and a unilateral decision made from a position of authority. And this is not a corporate problem. He's yours. He's family. The way everything you bring home becomes family, including the 300-year-old assassin standing behind me who is currently examining the garage ceiling with the intense focus of a man trying to be anywhere else, and the wolf who tore a warehouse door off its hinges before he'd known you a week." He paused, and the words came from somewhere below his usual register of controlled articulation. "You don't evict family by arranging transport permits. I know that. I knew it, and I did it anyway because I was scared of the fire damage and the sleep disruption and the..." Another pause. "The feeling that I can't protect you from something that you're choosing to love. The feeling that the choice might hurt you, and I wasn't asked about it, and there is nothing in my entire operational framework for a situation where I have to watch someone I love walk toward a risk I can't quantify." The garage held another moment of quiet. Sera held his gaze for a long beat. Her expression did the thing it did when she was receiving something that mattered, absorbing it rather than deflecting it. The way she absorbed everything that came to her with difficulty, with patience, with the specific attention of a person who understood that most things in the world just needed someone to actually look at them. "He doesn't need protecting from," she said, finally. "He needs protecting for. There's a difference. And you know there's a difference, because you are that difference, Lucas. You have been that difference since the moment I signed your contract in your boardroom with crumbs on my shirt. You just..." She took one step forward. "Quote, usually remember to ask first." She held his gaze. "So, here's what's going to happen instead. You are going to use your resources to fix Suit's legal status. Properly, with documentation and a legitimate holding agreement, and the kind of regulatory framework that makes bureaucratic interference complicated and expensive. You know how to build that. You've done it before." Lucas said, That would require significant corporate leverage and some carefully applied financial pressure on the relevant regulatory channels, Sera said. Yes, I know. You did it for Fenris's bounty recategorization. You did it for the shelter's building permits after the city rezoned the block. You do it every single time something I love is in bureaucratic danger, Lucas. You just usually tell me what you're doing. She looked at him with the gray eyes that held all that storm. So, tell me what you're doing. Ask me first. That's the whole thing. That's all it is. Lucas looked at Fenris, who was still examining the garage ceiling. The ceiling was not, as far as Lucas could tell, interesting in any architectural way. It was a standard poured concrete parking structure ceiling, but it was, apparently, fascinating. Will you let me fix his legal status? Lucas asked. Properly, through the right channels, with you involved in every step. Yes, Sera said. That's all you had to say. From the titanium box, Suit produced a sound that was equal parts diesel engine and vindication, a purring trill that rose at the end like a question answered satisfactorily. Sera crouched and unlatched the box. She reached in, gathered Soot against her chest with the practiced ease of a woman who had been doing this for 4 weeks and had developed a technique. And she kissed the top of his sooty head. He sneezed 3 sparks into her collarbone and purred at a frequency that could have vibrated small appliances. The sparks went out against her skin. Let's go home, she said. Fenris picked up the titanium box under one arm. $400 of fireproof engineering, he observed, used for a 30-minute round trip to a parking garage. It's a very good box, Lucas said. You could have bought a second espresso machine for that. The espresso machine does not need a sealed gasket. Debatable, Fenris said, given your feelings about the crema. He said it with the flat, exact delivery of a man who has been paying attention for weeks, storing up precise observations, and deploying them only when they will land with maximum efficiency. Lucas heard, underneath the delivery, something that was not quite amusement and was not quite warmth, but was the territory adjacent to both, the closest thing that 3 centuries of operational distance allowed. He was not going to say anything about it. Some things were better observed than named. They were home by 8:30, which meant they were inside the penthouse, Sera changing back into the light blue dress shirt that served as the uniform of everything she actually preferred about her life, when the shelter's alarm system triggered on Lucas's security panel. Not the fire alarm. The entry alarm. The one connected to the lobby sensor that lit up when something supernatural crossed the threshold at a body temperature or electromagnetic signature outside the human baseline. Multiple signatures. Lucas was already moving toward the door when his phone rang. It was Carla, the shelter's evening volunteer, and she was whispering. There are people here, she said. A lot of them. They have equipment. One of them has I don't know what that is. It looks like a whip. It's making a sound. Get into the back office, Lucas said. Lock the door. Don't come out. He looked at Sera. Sera looked at him. Dragon Wardens, he said. Guiled enforcers. They've come for Soot. How did they find out so fast? The transport permit application, Fenris said, appearing from the hallway with his jacket on, his expression stripped of every layer of sardonic performance and down to the thing beneath it, which was operational and cold and ancient and very good at its job. It went into the regulatory database. The Guild monitors those databases. Standard protocol. He looked at Lucas. I'll go first. Fenris. I will not shift, Fenris said, and the precision of those words carried the full weight of someone who understood exactly what he was promising. Not in her shelter, not with her furniture and her animals and her 3 years of work surrounding me. I will not destroy what she built. He paused. But I am going. Sera was already at the door, suit tucked inside the front of the light blue dress shirt against her chest, with the efficiency of a woman who had figured out over the past week that he was easier to transport this way and that the shirt's thermal properties were, at this point, supernatural. Lucas made a decision. He made it the way he made all real decisions. Not through calculation, but through the immediate, total certainty of a man who knew his own values and was done being strategic about them. Together, he said. The shelter lobby had 6 of them. 6 was significant. The Dragon Warden Guild did not send large teams to individual shelter calls. They sent large teams to sieges, to containment failures, to events they classified as non-negotiable extractions. Someone had filed a significant report. Someone had escalated this. 5 of the 6 were in tactical formation dark leather body armor, marked with the gold-silver insignia, carrying equipment that Lucas's Wolf cataloged in the first second, 3 suppression nets, 2 spectral binders, 1 device he recognized from intelligence briefings as a localized dimensional anchor, capable of preventing shift or transport within a 20-foot radius. The 6th was the one who mattered. She stood at the center of the lobby, and she was the kind of person who rearranged the geometry of a room simply by being in it. 5'11", built with the specific functional muscularity of someone who had spent a decade doing exactly the kind of work that destroys bodies at a rate that survival requires constant rebuilding. Her armor was different from the others older, and covered in the marks of use, claw scores, burn patterns, a row of parallel slashes along the left pauldron that looked like they'd come from something very large and very fast. Her hair was a deep, vivid crimson, pulled tight into a tactical braid. Her eyes, when they found Lucas, were the color of falcon hunting in bright weather-sharp and green, and entirely without negotiation. She carried a whip. Not a decorative piece. A weapon, silver-barbed cord, wound around her right forearm in carrying position, with the specific heft of something enchanted beyond its material composition. The faint, high harmonic it was producing confirmed what Carla had heard over the phone. Active containment magic, keyed to supernatural biology. Lucas could feel it across the room, a frequency that pressed against the wolf like a warning. "Alpha Gray," the woman said. Her voice had the quality of a prepared statement delivered without preparation, efficient, accurate, requiring no warmth. "I'm Executive Warden Sterling, Maeve Sterling. We have a registered report of an unlicensed abyssal fire dragon in active shelter care, presented under false classification as a domestic feline. The Guild has legal jurisdiction in this matter under the Supernatural Creature Compact, Article 9, Section 4. We're here to collect the creature and transfer it to a regulated facility." "You're welcome to your paperwork," Sera said, stepping past Lucas into the lobby with the precise, forward-pointing energy of a woman who had been handed an organizational challenge and was now in her native environment. She had Soot pressed against her chest inside the dress shirt. Soot's molten copper eyes were visible through the collar gap. He was completely silent, watching. "I have paperwork, too. Would you like to see mine first?" Sterling's green eyes went to Sera and recalibrated with the speed of someone who was good at reading rooms. "Ma'am, Matriarch of Chaos and Order," Sera said pleasantly. "That's my professional title. We can skip it. I'm Sera Collins Gray. I run this shelter. And you are welcome here, genuinely, any time you come through the front door with correct documentation and appropriate notice. 72 hours per Section 18 of the Municipal Animal Welfare Code, which applies to all inspections and removals from licensed care facilities, regardless of the classification of the animal in question." She smiled. "Did your team bring the advance notice documentation?" A pause. "This is a guild operation under supernatural jurisdiction," Sterling began. "Wonderful. The supernatural jurisdiction documentation, then, which, under the cross-jurisdictional agreement the city signed with the Eastern Seaboard Supernatural Council in 2019, Sera produced a folder from the desk drawer that Finn's purple ergonomic chair was beside. Because of course she had prepared a folder. Of course she had. Because Sera Collins Gray did not walk into her own shelter without being ready for it. Requires advance notice, a welfare assessment conducted by a licensed supernatural veterinary professional, and a co-signature from the relevant regional alpha. She held out the folder. "That last one is standing right behind me, and I don't think he co-signed anything." "Lucas?" "I did not co-sign anything," Lucas confirmed. Sterling took the folder. She opened it. She looked at it for a moment, and the look was the specific look of someone very good at their job, encountering a piece of work that is better at its job than they expected. That was when Frennis stepped out from the back hallway. He had not been wearing his jacket when he reached the lobby. He had left it somewhere, because what he was communicating with his body was not the casual menace of someone dressed for confrontation. It was something older and more economical than that. He wore a plain, dark shirt with the sleeves pushed up, showing the scar that ran from temple to collarbone in the lobby's fluorescent light, a topographic record of something that should have killed him, compressed into a silver line that went from the outer edge of his left brow, down through his jaw, and disappeared under the collar of his shirt. He stood at the edge of the back hallway with the unhurried stillness of a creature who had decided, very deliberately, where he was standing and why. Maeve Sterling looked at him. The dynamic in the room changed. It was not subtle. The 5 tactical wardens registered it with the precision of trained professionals. Weight shifted. Stances widened by 2 inches. The suppression net carriers angled their equipment fractionally, recalibrating coverage zones. The dimensional anchor operator moved to a spot 3 feet to the left, apparently on instinct, because that spot had better geometry for covering 2 targets instead of 1. All of it happened in under a second, and none of it was ordered. It was the reflexive recalibration of a skilled team encountering a variable that had not been in the briefing. Sterling and Fenris looked at each other across 12 feet of shelter lobby that now felt about 3 feet wide. Lucas watched 2 things happen simultaneously. Fenris catagluing the whip, the armor, the burn patterns, the claw scores, the specific musculature of someone who had developed it through functional use and not performance, and Sterling catagluing the scar, the mismatched eyes, the quality of stillness that only existed in creatures that had survived long enough to stop performing readiness, because readiness had become structural, biological, as automatic as a heartbeat. They were doing exactly the same thing. The recognition was mutual and instantaneous, and clearly annoying to both of them. "Black Fang," Sterling said. Her voice was flat, professional, and contained something that was not quite surprise and was not quite recognition, something more precisely calibrated than either. The response of someone who had studied a target extensively and was now running the live version against the filed data and finding the discrepancies. "Sterling," Fenris said. His voice was a different register than his usual dry drawl. Quieter. Directed. The way a weapon sounds when it's been picked up. "You're working a shelter front desk. I answer phones." "The Pale Fang," answers phones. The Pale Fang had an unexpected career development. He looked at her armor, specifically at the left pauldron's parallel claw scores, and the quality of his attention was the quality he gave the jerky bag focused, specific, with an assessment layered underneath it that was not casual. "Guiled mark you with those, or did something larger. Shale Drake, Kyoto, 18 months ago." She didn't look down at the armor. She didn't need to. She knew every mark on it. "Your file says you're theoretically bounty neutral as of last quarter. Eastern Seaboard Pack protection." "Theoretically?" Fenris agreed. "Doesn't change today's operation." Fenris stepped forward. It was a small step, 1 step, across the line from back hallway into the lobby proper, but the dimensional anchor operator's hand moved toward the activation switch, and 2 of the net carriers repositioned, and Sterling's right hand dropped to the wound whip with a speed that put her hand there before the conscious decision to move could have completed its pathway through her nervous system. The whip sang. That was the only word for the sound it made as it unwound from her forearm and settled into the space in front of her. A high, thin harmonic, silver-barbed chord, vibrating with enchanted frequency, keyed to supernatural biology with the specificity of a tuning fork. Lucas felt it across the room as a pressure behind his teeth, a tightening in the bones of his forearms. His wolf snarled. Fenris felt it as a kind of tinnitus, high and clean and interesting. He tilted his head very slightly, the way someone tilts their head at a complex piece of music. "You're going to use that," he said. "If you take another step," Sterling said. "Yes. You know what I am." "I know your file," 300 years. It's rank. The reason the Prague Guild reorganized their internal security protocols in 1887. Her green eyes were steady, professional, and contained nothing that looked like fear. Not suppressed fear, not managed fear. Actual, structural absence of it, the kind you develop by going into rooms with things that could end you and coming out the other side enough times that the fear mechanism gets overhauled. I also know you haven't shifted, which means you're choosing not to, which means there's a reason. There are walls, Fenris said, and furniture, and animals in the back kennels, and a woman I work for who has spent 3 years building something that matters. His mismatched eyes were entirely still. I don't shift in places that matter. Something very small and very specific moved through Sterling's expression. Not softness. Nothing that could be called softness. More like the involuntary adjustment of someone receiving information that conflicts with a previously stable model and recalibrating rather than ignoring it. Step back, she said. Let us do our job. No one gets hurt. That is also not happening, Fenris said, and took the second step. The whip came up. Fenris was already moving. He dropped his shoulder, rolled under the first strike with the easy, worn-in competence of someone who had spent 3 centuries learning to read telegraphed motion, and came up inside Sterling's guard with a speed that made one of the net carriers flinch backward half a step. He caught her wrist, the whip wrist, the right one not hard, not crushing, but with the precise grip of someone demonstrating that they could, in fact, stop the weapon, and held. Sterling's left hand came up immediately, palm strike to his collarbone, and she had her body weight behind it properly, shoulder and hip rotating in sequence, the biomechanics of someone trained by something more rigorous than a standard guild combat course. Fenris took the impact he took it, rather than deflecting it, which was itself a message, and stepped back 1 step, releasing her wrist. They stood 2 feet apart, both of them completely still, and the lobby held a breath. You took that, Sterling said. Her voice had changed. Not much. Fractionally, the shift in register of someone recalibrating upward. I was curious about your left, Fenris said. And? Sound mechanics. You've been taught by someone who fights large targets. The hip rotation is for something taller than a human. Dragon wardens generally are fighting large targets. The weight distribution in your stance is for a creature with a low center of gravity. He looked at her. Not just the drake. Something ground level. Something fast. Sterling looked at him for a moment. Then she swung the whip low, a horizontal arc at knee height, the silver cord singing that thin, enchanted harmonic. Fenris jumped it. A clean, unhurried jump, like a man stepping over a garden hose, except that the cord was moving at a speed that should have required more urgency than that, and the silver barbs would have torn through anyone without supernatural constitution, and he had judged the arc purely by sound and the pressure wave in front of it because he had not looked down. He landed. Sterling was already spinning into a second strike, a vertical downswing that would have wrapped the cord around his forearm and activated the enchanted binding at contact. He turned inside it, took the wrap on the meat of his upper arm rather than the wrist where the binding rune would have engaged, and used the tension of the cord against her pulled, not toward himself, but outward, a redirection that used her own momentum to pull her half a step into the space he'd just vacated. She recovered fast. Very fast. The kind of fast that came from fighting things that didn't give you the luxury of slow recoveries. She released the tension and let the cord fall into a new configuration in her hand before Fenris could use the length of it, and she came at him low, changed level entirely, driving her shoulder into his midsection, with the specific commitment of someone who had learned that commitment is the only thing that works against something larger than you. Fenris stumbled. He was surprised. Not much, a half-inch of displaced footing, but he was surprised. His ice-blue eye went briefly wide with it. He caught himself on the front desk, Finn's purple ergonomic chair rolling out of the way with a mournful squeak. Sterling was already resetting, breathing with the controlled rhythm of focused exertion. Whip up, stance balanced, watching. You went low, Fenris said. You were expecting me to stay at height. Everyone stays at height. Everyone who fights things they're bigger than, Sterling said. I've spent 6 years fighting things I'm smaller than. Different curriculum." She paused. "You favored your right side when you recovered. Old injury?" 1843, Fenris said. "Finnish death mage. It healed. It occasionally disagrees about that." The 5 tactical wardens had not moved during any of this. They were watching with the careful, calibrated attention of professionals observing something above their intervention threshold, not standing down, but correctly identifying that entering this particular exchange would be the error that got them hurt. Lucas had not moved either. He was watching Fenris's face. The expression on it was the thing he was watching, not the mechanics of the combat, which were extraordinary, but not surprising from 2 creatures of this caliber. The expression, the quality of absolute focused attention, the aliveness of a face that had spent so many years wearing various flavors of contempt and boredom and strategic patience, that the appearance of genuine, undiluted engagement was startling, like watching a structure that had been sealed for decades open its windows. Fenris was engaged, not tactically engaged, present, the way he was not present in most conversations, most rooms, most situations, with the full force of 3 centuries of banked attention aimed at a single point, which was Maeve Sterling resetting her stance 7 feet in front of him, with the unhurried readiness of someone who intended to continue indefinitely. "You're good," Fenris said. It wasn't a compliment in the standard sense. It was a factual assessment delivered with the weight of a genuine surprise, and it landed differently because of that weight. Sterling looked at him. "I know," she said. Fenris almost smiled. Sera pulled the fire alarm. The sound was immediate and total, the shelter's emergency system. Every bell in every corridor. A percussive wall of noise that hit the room with the authority of something that could not be argued with. The animals in the back kennels began their own response, barking and calling in the specific chorus of creatures who had been through emergency drills and understood that this sound meant move. Everyone in the lobby stopped moving. This was, Lucas suspected, entirely intentional. Sera stepped between Fenris and Sterling, and she did it with the calm, unhurried movement of a woman who had decided that her position was exactly here, and no amount of whip mechanics or ancient assassin combat history was going to shift it. "Thank you," she said to both of them, with the tone of someone ending a meeting that had run over schedule. She reached up and put her hand on the alarm panel, silencing the bells with a practiced 3-digit code. The lobby went quiet. The animals' chorus faded. She looked at Sterling. She looked at Fenris. "I have a folder," she said. "Let's talk about it." "No," Fenris said. His voice was back to the dry drawl. His expression was back to the controlled, sardonic economy of its usual setting. But there was a quality to it, a slight warmth in the outer temperature of it, like a wall that has been in the sun all day and holds the heat even after sunset that had not been there before. Sterling was looking at him, not watching him the way you watch a threat, watching him the way you watch something you don't entirely have the vocabulary for yet. "Black Fang," she said. "Sterling. This isn't over." "I know," Fenris said. And the quality of those 2 words in his voice was not what it would have been from anyone else saying them. It carried more than a combat assessment. It carried something that Fenris, clearly, had no intention of examining in public. Sera had set the folder back on the desk and was now standing with her arms loose at her sides, watching Sterling with the patient, measured attention she gave to animals who were frightened and hadn't communicated why yet. Not confrontational, not retreating. The specific stance of someone who was going to be exactly where they were until the situation resolved. Sterling looked at Sera. Then she looked at the dragon-shaped lump under the front of the dress shirt. Then she looked at Fenris. Then she looked at Lucas. "We have a registered report," she said. "We have jurisdiction. We have 6 personnel and the relevant equipment. I don't want to make this a scene." "Then don't make it a scene," Sera said, "because I have a phone full of contacts, and I'm not afraid to use them. I have the city attorney's personal number. I have 3 journalists who owe me favors. I have the regional supernatural council liaison's direct line, which I got last spring when they needed emergency foster care for a displaced Kelpie herd, and that liaison owes me 12 favors because Kelpies are an absolute nightmare to rehome." She paused. "And I have a husband who controls approximately 40% of the financial infrastructure that the Dragon Warden Guild uses to process its licensing revenue in this region, which I'm sure is a coincidence, but is also a thing that is true. Sterling looked at Lucas. 43%, Lucas said mildly. Fenris made a sound that might, in another context, have been a laugh. Sterling stood very still for a moment. She was running calculations, and she was fast at it. Lucas could see it in the micro-movements of her jaw, the quality of her attention as it moved from point to point in the room. She was weighing guild protocol against financial reality, against the specific, unusual problem of a shelter worker who had clearly prepared for this exact scenario and had done it better than the guild had prepared for her. "We can reach an accommodation," Lucas said. "My corporate legal team has been drafting a proposal for Suit's formal licensing since earlier tonight. It's a co-management framework shelter care with guild oversight, quarterly welfare assessments, transparent reporting. It's a better outcome for the creature than transfer to a sanctuary. I'm willing to discuss the financial structure of that arrangement." "And," Sera said, "I have a position that I need filled." Sterling's green eyes moved back to her. "Supernatural conservation specialist," Sera said. "Salaried. It's a real position. We've been meaning to hire one for 2 years. We just haven't found the right person. The job involves welfare assessment of high-risk supernatural animals, coordination with the guild and other regulatory bodies, and oversight of our non-standard intake cases." She looked at Sterling with the calm, direct attention of someone offering something real and meaning it. It would give the guild a legitimate operational presence here, which means no more emergency extractions, no more jurisdictional gray areas. You'd have access to the animals and the documentation from day one. Sterling stared at her. "You're offering me a job," she said. "I'm offering you the opportunity to do your actual work properly, with the resources and the legal standing to do it right," Sera said. "Instead of showing up with 6 people and a dimensional anchor to take an infant dragon from a woman who has not slept more than 4 hours at a time since he arrived and would like to be left alone to love him in peace." The lobby was very quiet. Fenris had crossed his arms during Sera's speech. His mismatched eyes had not left Sterling's face. His expression was doing something unusual for a face that typically communicated in the limited palette of contempt, boredom, and strategic patience. It was doing something that Lucas would have called interested, in the specific, alert way that Fenris was interested in things that surprised him. And very few things had surprised him in 300 years. Sterling looked at Sera for a long time. She looked at the folder. She looked at the lump under the dress shirt. She looked at Fenris, who was looking at her, and something passed between them in the frequency that combat professionals use, the wordless exchange of 2 people who have both, independently, assessed each other and arrived at conclusions neither of them was going to say out loud yet. She reached into her armor and produced a folded document. She opened it on the desk. She uncapped a pen. 6 months, she said. Trial basis. Guild retains the right to conduct independent welfare assessments monthly. If the licensing framework isn't formally filed within 90 days, we return to extraction protocol. 80,000 a year, Sera said. Full benefits, because this is a real job. Sterling paused. This is not a guild position. This is a shelter position. I set the salary. Sera looked at her steadily. You would be worth every dollar of it. Sterling looked at Sera for a long, still moment. Then, she signed. She signed with the brisk economy of someone making a decision they intend to commit to completely, which was, Lucas thought, the most honest thing he'd seen happen in a negotiation in years. Welcome to Second Chance's Animal Rescue, Sera said. From inside the dress shirt, Suit sneezed. A small shower of sulfur sparks arced up toward the lobby's smoke detector, which chirped once in protest. Also, Sera added, still looking at Sterling, we do have a fire suppression protocol. I'll walk you through it Monday. They got back to the penthouse at 11:15. Soot, released from the dress shirt, made a circuit of the living room, identified every piece of Lucas's remaining property he had not yet scorched, filed the information for future reference with the methodical efficiency of someone who takes their work seriously, and went to sleep in the fireproof habitat with the boneless contentment of a creature that had had an eventful evening and was extremely full of himself about all of it. Fenris stood in the kitchen for a long moment, turning his phone over in his hands in a gesture so unlike his usual, still, deliberate economy that it registered the way a crack in a seawall registers small at the surface, significant underneath. He was looking at the screen without actually looking at it. His expression had the slightly arrested quality of a thought in the middle of being processed, the look of someone who had received new information and was revising an old model around it. Lucas leaned against the kitchen island and waited. He was, by now, experienced enough with Fenris to understand that the man processed out loud approximately once every 6 weeks, and that the correct response to the rare event of its occurrence was to be present and not speak. "She's good," Fenris said, finally. "Sterling?" She held ground with 6 personnel and full kit, and she held it properly. Clean angles, no wasted energy. She had a reroute calculated before you even started the financial conversation. He set his phone down. The quality of stillness around him was different from his usual stillness. It had a slightly forward lean to it, a directedness. The Kyoto Claw score is a Shale-Drake strike pattern. That's a B rank at minimum, probably A rank given the size of the mark. She went in close. You go in close on a Shale-Drake with a whip. You've made a decision about what you're willing to risk. A pause. That is a decision made from a particular place. Lucas said nothing. The way she recalibrated when I stepped forward, Fenris said. Most guild operatives, when they recognize an S rank in their operational perimeter, go immediately to suppression protocol. She assessed first. She read me while she read the threat level. He paused. She noticed my right side. The Finnish death mage. 1843. Fenris turned his phone over once more. She noticed it in approximately 4 seconds of observation. That is fast. Another pause. The ground-level weight distribution in her stance. She's been fighting something fast and low in addition to large targets. The Shale-Drake alone doesn't explain it. Fenris, Lucas said, with the patience of a man who had been building to a point for several conversational exchanges and was now prepared to bring it home. Fenris looked up. Are you going to say the part where you've had an interesting professional observation about a colleague's combat methodology, Lucas said. Or are we going to do another 20 minutes of the part where you describe her technical skills in gradually increasing detail while looking at your phone? A long pause. I am not, Fenris said, interested in Warden Sterling. Of course not, Lucas agreed. I am professionally curious about someone who matches a Shale-Drake at close range and walks out of it with a superficial claw score and then immediately demonstrates ground-level weight distribution from an entirely different threat type, which is an unusual and specific combat education that implies extensive field exposure across multiple creature categories. Which is interesting, Lucas said. Competent, Fenris corrected, with the firmness of someone rejecting a synonym on precise technical grounds. It is competent. I observe competence. That is all this is. Completely. Fenris picked up his phone again. He set it down. She's going to be at the shelter on Monday. She is, Lucas said. I answer phones on Monday. You answer phones every day. I answer phones every day, Fenris confirmed. And there was a quality to the confirmation that suggested he was, for the first time, not thinking of it primarily as a debt obligation. He was quiet for approximately 7 seconds. Then he rose from the kitchen island with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who has made a decision and is done with the process. He reached into his jacket pocket. He set the penthouse key on the hall table. The key Sera had pressed into his hand on his first morning as a human resident, with the cheerful, unstoppable certainty of a woman who had already decided the matter and was simply following through on the logistics. Lucas looked at the key. I found an apartment, Fenris said. It's across from the shelter. The landlord didn't ask questions, which is the only relevant qualification. He paused. The building has good sight lines to the street. The shelter entrance is visible from the second-floor window. Another pause, during which he appeared to consider and then decide against elaborating further. I like knowing the animals are accounted for. The animals, Lucas said. Yes, Fenris said. The animals. He walked toward the hallway. Then he stopped. He stood with his back to Lucas for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice had the quality of something that had been decided and was being delivered cleanly, without unnecessary architecture around it. The pack protection was not an inconsequential thing, he said. The European guilds had 3 active operations in my name. The Vienna branch had been running a track on me for 11 years. You put your political capital in the supernatural council in front of all of that. It cost you, and you did it without asking for anything in return, including gratitude, which was, a fractional pause, the right instinct, because I'm not built for gratitude. It tends to come out sideways. He reached the hallway, but I know what it is when I see it, and I know what a debt looks like when it's been paid. He walked to his room. The door clicked shut behind him, with the quiet, final sound of something concluding on its own terms. And then, a moment later, there was the sound of a bag being packed. Quiet, efficient. The packing of someone who had spent 3 centuries developing a system for moving quickly and had never accumulated anything that couldn't be reduced to a single bag. Lucas stood in the kitchen for a moment. He looked at the penthouse key on the hall table. He straightened it until it was parallel to the table's edge. He looked at it. He left it where it was. Sera came out of the bedroom at 11:40, padding into the kitchen in bare feet, hair loose, in the light blue dress shirt that was the most recognizable article of clothing in Lucas's life, his in manufacture and provenance, entirely hers in every other meaningful sense, softened and shaped by months of being the garment she reached for when she was at home. And being herself. She looked at the penthouse key on the hall table. She looked at Lucas. He left, she said. He found an apartment. Across from the shelter? That's what he said. She was quiet for a moment, holding the knowledge of it. She had a look she got sometimes, not sad. Exactly. Not happy. Exactly the look of someone processing a good thing and a hard thing that had arrived in the same container. Then she laughed, quietly to herself. Of course he did. She came to Lucas, slid into the space beside him at the kitchen counter, and he put his arm around her automatically, the way breathing was automatic, because she had become the thing his body moved toward without consulting his brain first. He's going to keep an eye on Sterling. He is going to professionally observe the combat methodology of a colleague, Lucas said. That's what he said, isn't it? More or less. And you believe that. Lucas pressed his lips to her temple. He breathed in the scent of her vanilla and rain and the specific warm undertone that his wolf called home, with the certainty of a compass finding north. I believe, he said, that he is going to spend a significant amount of time across the street from the shelter, drinking coffee, not watching the door. Sera laughed. The real one, open and uncontained and luminous, with the particular joy of someone who found everything about the world around her endlessly, genuinely funny. The joy of a woman who had spent 28 years being handed things that were hard, and had somehow, inexplicably, arrived in a life that was mostly wonderful in the most impossible ways. Lucas felt it in his chest, warm and total, the way the wolf had always felt it since the first time she laughed in his boardroom at a manual that diagrammed laughter. Lucas turned off the kitchen light. They stood in the quiet penthouse for a moment, the first real quiet it had had in weeks. No diesel engine purring from the hallway. No subtle shuffling from behind Fenris's door. No 3-button espresso machine commentary drifting from the direction of the emergency jerky supply. Just the city, 43 floors below. And the two of them, and the low, resonant hum in Lucas's chest that had been there since a warehouse, and a set of zip ties, and a woman who hadn't screamed. He pulled her toward the couch. She went, folding into the space beside him the way she always did. Not arranged, not careful, just settling into it with the easy, practiced certainty of someone who had learned that this was where she fit and had stopped performing the approach to it. She curled her feet up under her, and he put his hand in her hair, the auburn cloud of it, and she tucked her head against his shoulder. The weight of her there, exactly there, that specific warmth and pressure, hit him with the force of something that still, after 14 months, had not learned to be ordinary. He suspected it never would. He suspected that was the point. Sud is going to be okay, she said. Not asking. declaring it the way she declared most things she'd decided were true, with the forward momentum of someone who had decided the universe could be argued into compliance if you spoke with sufficient conviction. "He's going to be okay," Lucas confirmed. "The licensing will go through. My legal team will have the framework filed within 60 days. Sterling will have her welfare assessments. The guild will have their oversight. Soot will have his habitat." He paused. "And his fireproof blanket. And his 3-inch titanium transport box, which we apparently own now, and which I've decided to classify as a business expense under supernatural asset containment infrastructure." "We could use it as a coffee table," Sera suggested. "We could not. It's got great structural integrity. It has an abyssal-grade thermal rating and a sealed gasket. It is not a coffee table." Think of the conversation starter. The conversation would start with, "Why do you own a containment unit rated for hellfire events?" which is not a conversation I am prepared to have with the Whitmore family at the quarterly dinner. "Tell them it's for the cat," Sera said. Lucas looked down at her, at the red lipstick, and the gray eyes, and the curl of her fingers against his chest, and the cloud of hair, and everything about her that had arrived in his boardroom by accident and become somehow more structural to him than anything he had spent 40 years intentionally building. He felt the wolf in the low, warm frequency of everything it had ever wanted, everything it had stopped believing it would find, that it had found anyway, in the most improbable and chaotic and entirely perfect way. He was going to say something about that. He was building the sentence, finding the architecture of it, reaching for the version of the words that would actually encompass the scale of what he meant, when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. She looked at Lucas. Her face did something sudden and complicated, a very specific kind of alarmed that involved the precise combination of the eyes going wide, the lips pressing together, and the expression of someone who has just received information that requires immediate cross-referencing before it can be fully processed. "It's Carla," she said, and she answered, and he could hear Carla's voice on the other end, hushed and rapid and containing the frequency of genuine distress. Sera said, "Where by the docks? How big? Are there bubbles? What color are the bubbles?" A pause. "Pink? Explosive?" Another pause. "Wings? There are wings?" She looked at Lucas, and her gray eyes were enormous, and her voice was very deliberate. "Okay, don't touch it. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She hung up. "Lucas," she said. "No," he said. "Someone just found a stray animal by the docks. Sera. It's winged. Absolutely. Pink," she said. "Pink and covered in bubbles. Explosive bubbles." Her eyes held his. Corgi-sized, maybe larger. Lucas's entire cardiovascular system began the familiar, dismaying process of bracing for whatever fresh apocalypse Sera Collins Gray was about to adopt, house in his penthouse, and name after a geological phenomenon. His wolf, which had been approximately 4 seconds away from a moment of genuine peace, was already filing a complaint with the relevant internal authority. The coffee table list, full world view, industrial fire extinguisher, throw pillows, was reopening like a ledger that would never, apparently, be closed. He looked at his wife. She looked back at him, and then she burst out laughing. Not the closed, careful laugh of someone managing a situation. The full laugh, the thrown-back, red lipstick flash, gray eyes, crinkled laugh that started in her chest and went through the whole apartment and hit the walls and came back warmer than it left. "It's a corgi," she wheezed. "Carla panicked and called me, but it's just a corgi. Fat one. Apparently it was running through a soap bubble art installation near the waterfront, and the pink dye got into its fur, and it was barking at a seagull, and Carla thought she thought." She couldn't finish. She was laughing too hard, bracing both hands on Lucas's arm. "She thought it was a winged pig. She has been my volunteer for 2 years, and she called me about a fat corgi covered in soap bubbles because she thought it was a winged pig." Lucas stared at her. He thought about the titanium box, the addendum, the 6 dragon wardens, Fenris packing quietly in the back bedroom, the key on the hall table, the cashmere throw that was now ash, the tie that was now ash, the quarterly projections with the dragon sneeze hole in the upper left corner. He thought about a warehouse and a zip tie and a woman who hadn't screamed. He thought about Sera on a cold bathroom floor in a fireproof blanket, holding something small and frightened in the dark, saying nobody gets evicted from this family. He thought about the fact that he was, completely and irrevocably, the most trapped man in the history of the Eastern Seaboard Pack, trapped by a woman who ran a supernatural animal shelter in his light blue dress shirts and weaponized empathy and the absolute unwavering certainty that everything broken deserved a home. He thought about how it was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He laughed. Not his controlled, fractional laugh. Not the Lucas Gray boardroom concession of humor. The actual laugh. The one that surprised him by existing, low and real, and something she had been excavating from him, one impossible Tuesday at a time. Sera looked up at him, bright with joy, and her hand found his face the way it had in a warehouse, and this time it was not his cheekbone in mid-shift. It was just his face. And she looked at him with the gray eyes that held more storm than sky and said, "You are so stuck with me." "I know," Lucas said. "The corgi's going to need a home. Just so you know. It's pink, Sera. Temporarily pink. The dye washes out." She tilted her chin up toward him. "You love me." "Catastrophically," he said, "without remedy, against every organizational instinct I possess." "I know," she said and kissed him, and the wolf sang. Not a howl, something quieter. The frequency below sound, below language, below thought. The one that said found and home and never again and mine. All at once. Always. Down the hall, the smoke alarm beeped once suit, dreaming and went quiet. In the apartment across from the shelter that had not yet been furnished, a man with mismatched eyes and 3 centuries of survival instinct sat in the dark by a window. Because the window had good sight lines, and the reasons for that had nothing to do with the shelter at all. The city moved below them, 7 million people composing their ordinary lives, completely unaware that in the penthouse on the 43rd floor, a wolf was counting himself the most fortunate creature in any jurisdiction, supernatural or otherwise, that he had ever occupied. The corgi's name, they would decide at 9 the next morning, was Peony. She was, in fact, temporarily pink. She was also, as it turned out, 62 pounds of architectural determination in a low-clearance body. And she knocked over the secondary bookcase on her first morning in the penthouse, rearranging Lucas's color gradient system into a pile that took him 45 minutes to restore, while Sera watched from the kitchen with a cup of coffee and the specific expression of a woman who has decided that watching her husband reorganize bookshelves is one of the most genuinely joyful things she has ever witnessed. It was fine. It was all completely fine. Thank you so much for listening to episode 3. Drop a comment and tell me, which parts of the story do you like? If you're not subscribed yet, please hit that button. If you like the above story, we release new episodes. I'll see you in the next one.